Sure. Well, thank you all. My name is Tony O'Driscoll, speaking to you from Durham, North Carolina today. I've got a Macintosh over here, and I'm Skyping. I've got a PC, and I'm in Second Life, and it's a pleasure to see you all. And thank you all for your interest in the research. I think some of the work that you've all been doing that I reviewed earlier this morning stemmed from an article, Leadership's Online Labs, and what I'd like to do today, after talking with Rob and David, is share with you where this idea came from. How did we convince IBM to part with money to allow us to do this research? Let me just pause and make sure, is my voice coming through okay?
Yeah, your voice is coming through fine, Tony. It's perfect.
Great. Just let me know, Rob, if it's not working.
Can you give me 1 second? For the audience, is it too loud? It's a bit too loud. Eric, maybe you can, or sorry, Mike, can you, just a tiny bit. Can you try speaking again, Tony? Or maybe you can turn.
Sure, how about that?
Yeah, try again.
How about that? Is that better?
Okay. Yeah, perfect. Okay. Take it away.
Okay. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of the story of how we got to do the research and then drive through some of the key points and maybe add some context to what I've been doing since. For instance, I spent 3 days with the EA Electronic Arts last week up in Vancouver in their innovation lab, and we had a lot of fun talking about games and work. So the first notion here and the first thing that got us some awareness within the IBM constituency was this notion of the webvolution. And I won't go through it in detail. There is a YouTube out there on my blog, which I'll share at the end, that you can go take a look at. But we were fundamentally making the argument that just as Andy Grove from Intel says, we've only felt 5% of the impact of the internet, or as Chambers has been quoted as saying right now that the 3D internet is going to have 6 times the impact of the browser-based internet. I'm not sure where you get 6 times, but I've heard that quoted as I work at Cisco. There seems to be a webvolution. There seems to be an evolution of the web that's predictable. The first web was about the read-only web and the browser technology allowing us to access content, and then very quickly as the content started to increase, to find stuff. So that's where Netscape and Google came from. Web 2.0, the inflection point there was Sean Fanning and the notion of the web not being a read-only but read-write web, participatory web. And the value propositions of share, participate, and collaborate were ushered in. And to my mind, forever changed the nature of society, business, and technology, if you will. Technology co-evolves with society and business and enterprise. That's one of my theses that I operate on as an academic. So what we see in Web 2.0 with the advent of Sean Fanning and eBay or MySpace.com, where people update their page 30 times a day, and there's 232,000 new MySpacers each day. It will be the 8th largest country in the world. Is very, very rapid S-curve adoptions of these social software. So if Web 1.0 was about the democratization of access, Web 2.0 was about the democratization of participation. I guess the best example, the two well-known examples of that, if you've read Wikipedia or Wikinomics, is Linux, which is the creation of the open source software, and Wikipedia, which I'm sure many of you use. So what happens now when we go into the third dimension? I'd submit to you that Wikipedia becomes Wikitecture, and we co-create in 3D in a way that's previously been unimagined. So as we started to look at this webvolution or wevolution, we started to look at what does it mean for the future of enterprise. And we came up with this crazy notion that the enterprise of the future might consist of 1 billion one-person enterprises rather than the large multinational companies that we have today. So essentially, companies move from commanding and controlling human resources to orchestrating and coordination of capability around endeavor. So in a flat topological structure like an IP network, what we have are oases of need and oases of capability, and the web provides a mechanism to match capability with endeavor, bringing to life the notion of talent, opportunity, and passion, and unleashing huge creativity that will fundamentally undermine how we think about enterprise. You can come at it from economics perspective. If those of you are economists looking at Coase's law, saying that firms will shrink to the size where the transaction cost inside the firm equals the transaction cost outside the firm, which argues that firms should specialize and shrink. But we were very intrigued about this notion that the future of enterprise might well be 1 billion one-person enterprises connected through the web. Some examples of that, and Charles Ledbetter does a whole much better job of this than me, but the idea here is in enterprise examples, he brings up the example of the mountain bike industry. And he said, who created the mountain bike industry? And the answer was it was a pack of rabid consumers who integrated bicycles with motorbike brakes, with suspension systems, and came up with a new industry completely created by consumers that is now a very, very large part of the bicycle industry, if you will. So by this notion of prosumption and engaging your consumers in the production, co-creation of your product is becoming more mainstream. And environments such as Second Life, where we are today, or There.com, or Proton Media, or any of them, can allow us to do things on a scale and with speed that we haven't seen before. So this creates a new set of interesting challenges for the large enterprise. The large enterprise today has to work in an ecosystem-based value co-creation environment. It's not about working just behind the firewall. It's about partnering with your extended relationships and with your consumers and back into your supply chain to orchestrate your network to create value in new and different ways. And when we started talking about new and different ways, we said we have to figure out what that looks like. And what that looks like is a game. As a strategy professor here at Duke University, what I look at is game theory applied to strategy formulation. And a lot of that starts to get applied when you look at value networks and you start to understand how to become the Grand Central Station node in a very complex value network that's fundamentally underwritten by technological affordance underneath it. There's some examples of distributing and gamifying work that have come out. One example is from NASA, where they had to name craters on Mars. They had 4 PhDs working on that. It was going to take them a good chunk of time. They decided to put the rules up for identifying a crater and said, hey, let's make it a game. You can name your crater. Lots of people dedicated their time and talent to do it and got the task done in 4 days. So the notion of gamifying work. Incentive is out of the pharmaceutical industry. They essentially figured out how to distribute labor for solving rudimentary chemical problems and made a marketplace out of it. And obviously we're seeing a lot of things like the X Prize for getting to space, or the Progressive X Prize for getting the first car that can get 100 miles per gallon that's commercially viable product. So what we're seeing is work is becoming more and more distributed. And the way that work is moving towards is that it becomes more like a game. It becomes more fun. God forbid that we have more fun in corporate America or in corporate Holland or wherever you happen to be listening to this broadcast today. So, we're talking about all this crazy stuff, but this one particular chart is the one where we actually got the executives at IBM to invest. One was talking about the economies inside these environments, and I'm quoting Castronova's work in his first book here, where he's saying that Norath, which is the country in EverQuest, if you figured out the cost of all the avatars on eBay and did the math, it was about the 77th largest country in the world. The one that was more interesting, though, was World of Warcraft. At that time, they had 8 million Warcrafters, averaging 20 hours a week. So the total World of Warcraft hours, meaning time that people were in there spending ergs, conducting work activity, recruiting people, enticing people to join, developing Dragon Kill Point systems, trying to get through the gates of Encourage with more than 150 people at one point in time, 150 avatars, was 160 million World of Warcraft hours. So we kind of did the math on that and reflected that it would take IBM's entire workforce of 330,000 people 12 weeks to match 1 week of World of Warcraft activity. So the notion of erg aggregation and how an organization like World of Warcraft can attract that many brain cycles and coordinate that many brain cycles was very interesting, not only to IBM, but also to Manpower. So we looked at these statistics and we looked at the diffusion and we said, you know what? If we're going to try and figure out what the future of enterprise looks like, maybe the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed, as Gibson and others have said. And maybe what we need to do is study massively multiplayer online role-playing games as a potential possible future for the enterprise. That was our first aha. Maybe games have some insight into them as to how work might evolve over time. And by observing how games function today, we'll be able to figure out how work will function tomorrow. That was our first aha. Sounds incredibly obvious today as I say it, but that was actually a breakthrough a couple of years ago, for us at least. Lots of data out there about tomorrow's virtual workers. Dan Hunter, a colleague at Wharton, this is very pertinent to me. The reason I put it up here is I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and so does he, and he confidently predicts that his kids will be working in one of these worlds. So his point is, if you've got kids this age and you're not putting them on Webkins or Club Penguin, you are not allowing them the opportunity to develop a revenue stream for themselves in the future. And by only limiting them to meat space for revenue generation, you get yourself in trouble. So Tony, you better start thinking about your kids working inside these environments. That leads us to the research. So we were pitching this idea. We were talking to the executives at IBM. They had interesting concerns about, look, if the future is a 1 billion one-person enterprises, what does it mean for a brand like IBM? Do we become the curator of our brand? Do we embrace our ecosystem partners? Do we open up the firewalls? How do we coordinate and orchestrate work? What does it mean for innovation? We know that innovation, one of the cornerstones of it is collaboration. So they came up with 3 key questions. What can we learn from games about innovation? What can we learn from games about collaboration? And what can we learn from games about leadership? In typical fashion, we took away those very, very large questions, partnered with colleagues Byron Reeves at Stanford and Tom Malone at MIT, and we sat down and said, okay, how would we parse this work out if we were to go answer them? And came back and said, we can't do all 3, you got to pick one. So if you know anything about IBM and the Global Innovation Outlook, which I'd encourage you to go check out, that's managed by a board that is all the senior executives at IBM, Nick D'Onofrio, Ginny Rometty, Paul Horn, who runs research, and others. And they said, well, if you can only pick one, we want you to study leadership. We can look at innovation and collaboration later, but everything starts with leadership. So the research question we went into is, as business becomes increasingly distributed and virtual in nature, what kinds of leaders will emerge and what attributes will they have? So our research for the particular piece of work that ended up in Leadership Online Labs and HBR really tried to answer that question. The way we went about it was pretty simple. At the time, we thought it was pretty novel. We knew that you were not going to get any IBM executive. Well, we errantly assumed that you were not going to get any IBM executive to go in and spend the requisite 450 hours as a Warcrafter or EVE onliner to develop a key understanding of what was going on. So instead what we did was we found level 70, at the time level 60, Warcrafters and similar leaders inside of EverQuest and EVE and so on and so forth. And we basically followed them around. We followed them around and we mapped their leadership behavior back to Sloan's distributed leadership model. And we started to tag and videotape everything that was going on and say, hey, this kind of leadership gets exercised, so we're going to tag that to the visioning component. And essentially, it was like an ethnographic study, except we were doing it in virtual worlds, in this case, a set of avatar-mediated game-playing worlds, and observed all of the behaviors to see whether or not the behaviors articulated in the Sloan leadership model were getting exercised and practiced and executed inside the world, inside whatever virtual world we're in. And we found that they did. So just to give you an idea of the leadership behaviors we were looking at, we took the Sloan leadership model, which is basically broken up into visioning, collaborating, evaluating, and executing. But then underneath each one, there were behaviors like creating a compelling vision or demonstrates resilience to an emotional stamina when trying to get the bureaucracy to doing something, or relentlessly driving people towards goals and objectives. So these are common behaviors that you would observe in any kind of leadership system. And we tracked them and we mapped them. So what we found in the first study essentially was that the gaming environment itself is a great vehicle for exercising the leadership muscles that people execute today in the corporate world. So if you want people to learn how to recruit and how to motivate and how to incent and how to get people all rowing in the same direction and coordination, so on and so forth, games are a very good place to do it. Why? Because leadership happens fast. You have to make a lot of decisions very quickly. The workforce is voluntary, so you have to do a lot of motivational type stuff. There's a currency instead of reputational capital inside these games that allow people to distribute the role of leadership more effectively. So basically, our findings were these are good places to learn about leadership. So then we decided to go a little bit further. We said, well, instead of just asking gamers, in the abstract, what if we went back into IBM, the same company that funded this research, and what if we were able to articulate or isolate a certain number of a certain population that were both gamers, but also senior level managers or above inside the company. So we went out and asked and said, hey, we're doing some research that's a follow-on to the first set of research that we did, and we want to ask you some questions. Please let us know if A, you have been a leader inside a massively multiplayer online role-playing game, and we knew what role they played at IBM. So we came back with 150, 160 or so, I think was the N for this. And we started asking them questions. We started to say, how relevant are these behaviors as for your leadership role inside the game, as opposed to for your leadership role inside the company? So when you're leading people on projects that are multi-million-dollar projects. And we found pretty strong correlation. They were equally important. The only one that wasn't was number 18, which is monitors, organize, and drives others relentlessly towards an established goal. That was much more important in the corporate context and not so important in the massively multiplayer context, because distributed leadership, those of you who play games know, it kind of happens all by itself. You don't need somebody kicking your butt every 2 minutes to get something done. There is this kind of collegial kind of get it done through distributed leadership perspective. So when we asked them high-level questions, we said, so what do you think about this game stuff? 39% of them believe that MMORPG leadership approaches can be used to improve leadership effectiveness in the enterprise. This is very important. What they're saying is that they've learned stuff in games that they wouldn't have learned anywhere else that they find very useful at work. So that we found that to be interesting. That's up to 40%. 49% of them said that game playing has improved their real-world leadership capabilities. That correlates with what we found earlier, which is saying all of the leadership attributes that you would find in the slow management model get exercised inside games. But the non-obvious one, the reason that all of us like to do research, is when something pops out that you did not anticipate. And the non-obvious one was 75% of the respondents believed that the environmental factors within massively multiplayer online role-playing games could be applied to make work better. And what they meant by that were the reputational capital systems, the currency systems like drag and kill points, and the narrowcast, broadcast, multicast types of communication that go on inside these virtual worlds, as well as the displays. So most of these displays, whether you're in EVE Online or EverQuest, they're essentially a real-time workflow that show the organizational health of the people, the procedural work that you're doing, and all of the communication in real time. So imagine 60 people in a guild looking through the people, process, and communication lens in real time as you're moving forward. This is not a dashboard like Jack Welch where you roll things up and he decides which part of the business to shave off to drive up the share price. This is real-time workflow feedback consumed by the whole group and fed back through the whole group that allows the collective wisdom of that group to be exercised. And what we found was with those types of affordances inside of games, you get this notion of successive approximation, people moving through a set of discrete decisions with imperfect information to the point where they knew they had to re-vector and realign on their information. So that's essentially what we came up with. The last thing I have there is a blog entry, which I've just, hold on, I've lost myself here, Rob, so let me just kind of back up here. Here we go, sorry. If you like what you heard here, there's a lot more obviously behind the research. There's also 3 or 4 other papers that were more academic papers that fed into the HBR article. They can all be found on my blog, which is whatatrip.wordpress.com. I've had the pleasure of reading through a lot of the abstracts, and just for proof, here they are, all printed out, and I read through them this morning. And the work that you're doing at Utrecht is to be commended. I was on the phone with Byron Reeves this morning, in fact, and he said he really wishes he could be here, but he has a dissertation defense. But he is also taking a look at this work, and we are humbled at the fact that you rallied around our research, and it's always, as an academic, a pleasure when you can convince, coerce, or cajole colleagues into your line of thinking. So with that, Rob, I don't know if you wanted to do some Q&A or anything like that, but
Yep. We'll,
I'm done.
Okay, thank you very much, Tony. Much appreciated. Let's do a quick question and answer. I'll grab the mic if I can find it. Okay, it's on. Does anybody have any questions for Tony O'Driscoll? Anybody? No? Is there something you guys are working on projects? Yeah.
Yeah, I heard you talking about a possible scenario in the future of how IBM is going to work, where people are going to collaborate and they are going to actually be in the virtual world. But the way I have understood on how the multinational corporations work, you have, if not hundreds, thousands of teams working on different networks, working on different domains, on different servers. And at the end of the day, it's all coming down to binaries where we are using computers. So how do you see this being a realistic option in future?
Well, I think, just as we had the, we had the multinational, we at IBM, I'm not there anymore, but I certainly have a lot of affinity for that organization, are moving towards what Sam Palmisano would call the globally integrated enterprise. So the concept there is that work seeks its own level. There is no home and away anymore, is how Sam likes to say it. It's all one place, and work seeks its own level, and that's at the confluence of the price point with the capability to get the work done. So if you can imagine a marketplace type strategy in the future where there is an ecosystem platform, just like eBay is a platform where I can find your trash and be willing to separate with my money to you for it because it's something you don't value but something I value highly. Now you have that same kind of platform that's developed, and the currency and reputation around it is for work activity. So I think as you're moving towards a globally integrated enterprise, certainly there's a lot of work to be done in the kind of architecture. But as we move towards services-oriented architectures, and we move towards platforms that have the components of gaming on it, like currency, transparency of reputation and capability, you'll start to see work become more fluid and orchestrated, and Tom Peters' notion of free agent nation becoming more of a reality. Is that there today? No. Are we seeing glimpses of it with the work I'm doing with clients like Cisco and IBM? Absolutely.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else who'd like to ask? Question? Don't be shy. No? Okay. Then I'd like to thank you, Tony, very much, much appreciated. I'll be in touch.
All right, Rob.
Yep. Fantastic. Really great.
Well, thank you all very much, and thanks for accommodating me. I may have been out of sync here, but I had a hard stop at 2, so appreciate that, Rob.
Okay. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.